Okay, everyone okay with us videotaping this for people that can't be here? We can, you can always stand behind Laura if you don't want to be on the camera. All right.
Those that are wanted.
Okay, well, thank you for coming. My name's Rene Skaggs. I'm the Farm Planning and Ag Assistance Program Director for the Pierce Conservation District. So are all of you familiar with conservation districts and what we do? Anybody not? Okay, so I'll do the spiel. We're a subdivision of state government, kind of like a school district. We get some basic funding from the state. We are non-regulatory, and we were established after the Dust Bowl to help prevent man-made agricultural natural disasters from occurring again, which is basically what the Dust Bowl was. Bad farming practices led to nothing on the soil to hold it in place, so it basically blew from that Four Corners region all the way to Washington, D.C. So there's pretty much a district in every county in the U.S., and we base our programs on what the natural resource concerns are in our area. So Western Washington, lots of water quality issues. So when we're doing our programming, or if I'm coming out to your farm, I'm thinking about how can I help them protect and improve water quality. If you're a livestock owner, I'm also giving you ideas that will kind of two bangs for your buck. You're going to also have more grass, you know, not have a giant manure mountain behind the barn, that sort of thing. And like I said, we're non-regulatory. We're going to give you recommendations, but we're never going to make you do anything. And sometimes we can find financial assistance to help you do those things, which is the case with you two. The kiln was a cost share project through our Sustainable Farms and Fields program, and we have a flyer on the table over there about that program, and we're actually collecting landowner requests right now because we're going to put in another application in June. So we have multiple other programs at the Conservation District. We've got a brochure on the table that talks about all of our programs. But before we turn it over to Claire and Pete, James is going to give a little talk about what he does at the district.
So James Moore, also with Pierce Conservation District. My programs are wildfire and energy. On the wildfire side of things, I do free home assessments and forestry visits for folks. I set those up with our partners over in Mason Conservation District, and as well as the Department of Natural Resources. And for the energy side of things, I help people get grants for installing solar panels and energy efficiency upgrades for farms and rural small businesses. And beyond that, I do a lot of tabling events, like today.
Awesome. So before we pass it over, and these folks, Claire and Pete, thank you so much for having us at your beautiful property. Before they start telling you all about their process here, just to get an idea why you're all here. So who is interested in the forestry, using this instead of burning your slash pile? Raise your hand. Okay, who is a crop person or gardener and interested in biochar for that application? Cool. And who is, you know, clearing to around your house to make your property more Firewise and might be using it for that application? Okay. Any other reason that I'm missing? Just interested? Okay, I think everybody raised their hand for one reason or another. Okay, so take it away.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming. I am Claire McCahill, and this is my husband, Pete. We have been here for about 10 years. This is Perigee Farm, and like Rene said, we got this biochar kiln with the help of Pierce Conservation District. We've also been the recipients of lots and lots of resources and assistance over the years, pretty much the entire time we've been here. I grow cut flowers, and we have sheep and chickens, and we sell eggs, and we have bees. If anyone's allergic to bees, we do have 2 hives which are within this garden, just FYI, safety first. And we have pigs too now, and so we sort of moved here with the idea of providing for ourselves and our own needs. The big goal was like, let's grow greens through the winter, and it's sort of grown from there. And I've become a passionate nerd with native plants, and we grow a number of vegetables, and we have fruit and nut trees growing in an area back there. And the most exciting thing recently, besides the kiln, is that we put in a number of hedgerows, also with the help of Pierce Conservation District, and they're all specialized, kind of templatized versions of a wildlife support planting. We put in 4 here that are for flower farmers in particular, so things that support the animals and the bugs, and you can cut from and use for bouquets and that sort of thing. And then we've got an edible one as well. So keep your eyes on that coming down the pike. We're hoping to show people what those are like as they mature. And yeah, so we should have raised our hand every time on the biochar. We're using it in every way. We've done 1 burn, and this is the proof of that. Here's a bucket if you'd like to get up close and personal, but it looks just like charcoal. But our hope is to, number 1, use this as a way to not only deal with a lot of debris that's already here. We're on about 100 acres, and we have a big forestry plan for 10 acres. And so we wanted to find a way to repurpose the stuff that's already dead and down, and biochar seemed like the best way to make that possible. You can mulch things, and we have a chipper. You can bury things and do hugelkultur, and we're doing all sorts of stuff like that elsewhere, but sinking carbon into the ground. And then also we are on sand. It's like river bottom, a lot of our property, and so nothing is held within the soil. So being able to add such a porous substrate that'll hold on to not only nutrients but life as well, microbial activity, that kind of thing, is just more supportive of the whole property, or that's the hope. And then there are the benefits, like you can keep the urine smell down with livestock, or activated charcoal. Some people are into eating it. So it's really sort of, we're scratching the surface, and there's a lot to be done, and we have our ideas, but we're also here just kind of for the ride and to experiment. And yeah, thanks for being here at the very beginning. Like, maybe come back and we'll be really experts eventually, but probably not. Do you want to add anything?
Our property was Weyerhaeuser land. Our estimates are that it was last logged about 50 years ago, and was partially replanted. We've got, 16 different stands of trees on our property, like I think. It's very complex the way it's grown back. And all of it is super, super overgrown. And then trying to improve those areas, both from a fire perspective, a wildlife perspective, and just sort of a use and enjoyment perspective, dealing with all the overgrowth has been just a massive challenge. And like Claire said, there are lots of different things you can do with the material, but we first learned about this from some other people who were doing forest cleanup, rake force down in Lewis County.
They use goats to first munch non-burnable debris, and then go in and use a kiln to burn the biochar. And that's something that we do too. We rotate our animals through in sort of succession. They're all handling something different, and they also expose just how much fuel you have to put in the kiln.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt.
But he'd been making biochar on his property for years, and had just been continuously adding it to his vegetable garden to kind of see if there was an upper limit on when things started to turn south from a production and quality standpoint, and he hadn't found it. I mean, the soil was 70% biochar and just gorgeous. So, like Claire said, we're really trying to grow stuff in sand, and so those two needs, one dealing with the overgrowth, and second dealing with the soil, are kind of the main motivators for us.
Yeah. What's that? Well, I sure would if I had some marketing help or marketing genius. And I'll think about that if you think it's a cool thing to do. I don't know of anyone else who's like a biochar flower person, so maybe I'll get ahead of the curve with that recommendation. So just a little bit more about like where we are here. This is proof that we were here. We used the tractor to scoop things up. You can kind of see where we did some active scooping, but it's pretty flat here, and we were able to get most of it up without mixing in a ton of dirt. Because it was our first burn, we had a few surprises, just how much fuel. You'll go through and you'll see when we get to the space by the kiln what I'm talking about a little bit more, and then how things burn, like how it all ends up. We were amazed that things just get burnt and you add and add and add, and you're essentially filling up the kiln in an ideal world. We certainly didn't with our first pile of stuff. We did our best to gather things up, but we just really couldn't have imagined how much it would churn through. With things, because we were just throwing stuff in, there were some things added a little late when it wasn't like a super hot fire, and that's this. Which is not biochar. I mean, we've still got like actual unburned wood in the middle here, but it makes a decent-ish edging. So we're creative. We're also lazy, and that's how we decided to use those pieces. I think that commercially available biochar is crushed. Typically, I talked to a friend who's purchased some actually for use with the Nisqually Land Trust, if anybody's interested in that. But he said theirs was much more almost a powder form. And another thing that we did that's probably not recommended is we just top dressed garden rows with this. We just drove the tractor around and I shoveled it on, and you want to mix it in typically because it's going to hold things in the soil. We've started to broad fork it in slowly, but one thing we didn't do was add nutrition to the biochar itself, and so you have this porous carbon that you're putting into the soil, and if you do that, you have the risk of everything from the soil getting sucked out into the biochar. So people often will add nitrogen or fertilizer of some kind to the biochar before adding it to the soil. So this itself shouldn't be considered like organic material in particular, or even like a fertilizer type amendment. It really needs to be kind of doctored up first. But because we're experimenting and because we have just sand, there's really no wrong way to do it is kind of our idea. And we like to see how different things work. So some rows will probably get the urinated on biochar. And if you would like to participate in that, you're welcome to pee in this bucket. Segue to, if you also want to pee indoors or whatever, go in the white door on the front porch and then straight through, take a right, bathrooms on the left. I think every other door is closed, but anyway, help yourself.
And if people want more of the science, we did a webinar last year or year before with a biochar researcher that was getting his had gotten his PhD from WSU and was using biochar in lots of experiments. So we did a webinar with him, and that is on our website. And if you go into the farm pages, I think that was in the soil. There's like a little bucket, and go in there and you can watch that webinar and learn more of the science and the uses and all that. We're kind of focusing really on the making it here, not all the how you use it and charge it and all that jazz. But
I had a question. Did you use like the poultry? What's the word I'm looking for? Like the feces and all that. Did you mix all that in and all your refuse too? Because I was reading up on that today too. They could say you take all your manure. All your manure and everything else and burn that into your biochar.
And that would be, I mean, if you're thinking about building the ideal compost, you're balancing browns and greens. So you want to have dead leaves and then the grass clippings as well, or whatever it is. And so manure would be a nice complement to this, which is just straight up browns or carbon.
Although I'd wonder how much of it survives the heat.
yeah, I would think.
I mean, and in my mind, it would make more sense to add it later.
Yeah.
I was
and let it
reading
sort
up
of
on
charge
it. Talked about
the
manure biochar. There was like
I think it's more putting it in your
Wood.
composting process, and then
basically any organic material that you can heat up and pyrolyze, you can make biochar out of. People do it with nut shells, wood, grasses,
Rice hulls.
It needs to have enough loft to it that it doesn't completely compact, so you can't do it with sawdust because you need the gas to be able to get in between the individual pieces. But short of that, you really can do any material as long as it's carbon based.
Which is another great thing for small landowners like us. We don't have the equipment or really the interest in building giant piles, and we're dealing, I mean, everybody's got kind of different levels of debris, and we have everything from tiny little sticks up to big logs, and in theory we can deal with all of it as long as it's sort of packed the right way and tended to properly.
And that's a good segue to James talking about, so, you know, having a giant pile, there's all sorts of permitting involved in that, and obviously bad things, you know, lots of smoke coming off of that. So that's partly why we're promoting using a kiln that doesn't make the smokes. And there's a new update.
Yes. I'll take it from there. 2024, we got a Senate bill passed here in Washington, SB 6212, I believe it was. You could just Google biochar bill, Washington State, easy to find. And it put in writing that the state is recommending the usage and exploration of biochar, which we have a lot of clean air agencies around Washington, and their general consensus was we don't really want that for a variety of reasons. But as research is coming out showing that there is less air pollutants and you should do something with the material because you don't want it just piling up on your property, that there are a lot of benefits to using it, and the way that you burn it and new kilns coming out do make it much less air polluting. A couple things to know about it. One, you need to be sure where you are when you use a kiln. So in other words, you don't want to use it in the middle of Tacoma kind of thing. Certainly outside of what's called the urban growth area. I have a couple maps here that show what that is. We are well outside of it out here, so there's no problem. The second part, and this one's a little trickier. I've spoken to a few of the engineers at the Puget Sound Clean Air Agency, and in terms of biochar, they're still on the fence about it, or at least they're still learning a lot about it. But if you want to consider more of a industrial scale size business of doing this, they're still saying probably not. If you're doing it for your own farm or small batch, something like that, you're fine. You're out in the urban growth area. They're not going to do anything. As long as you don't smoke out your neighbors. That shouldn't be too difficult. But beyond that, there's still a lot of science that is being researched about it. Even though this practice is centuries and millennia old in its own way, they're looking into what the benefits are, chemical benefits for the soil, the air pollution benefits, or rather the lack of air pollution that it creates. And they're also looking at different kiln designs and all sorts of different stuff. So it's certainly an evolving science and study right now, but at the very least, you have the currently in the outside of the urban growth area to do this kind of thing.
And we thought you had to get a permit through your fire department, but what did you find out?
DNR has what's called the burn portal online now. It used to be that you had to go physically to an office and fill out an actual paper slip with a pencil, but now they have a very clunky website. So I of course didn't find a biochar kiln drop down option, and so called the office and talked first to someone who was in the Enumclaw office, and then got a call back from Lane Peterson, who was very curious about the kiln, just kind of wanted to know a little bit about it, and told me that I didn't need a permit, mostly because this is a flame cap kiln, and because of its design, you're burning off most of the emissions, and they're taking fees and making people buy permits mostly to cover the pollution that you're putting into the environment. So that's what I was told. That happened on Thursday, and he said, for this weekend you're good, and this should be fine, but it really just kind of depends on what happens with research coming, and I think the clean air agencies and how they decide to sort of proceed into the future. But so far so good, and we were thrilled with the news because the permit is $100.
But it was also unclear whether that permit might be valid for multiple burns.
Right.
It was all very, very nebulous, and we've been working on this for about 2 months, and still this is the most concrete answer we've gotten, which is far from concrete.
But the good news was everyone I spoke to was sort of curious and knew about biochar and sort of saw good things. It wasn't like, oh no, what are you doing? We're not going to have that. So I experienced kind of an open curiosity, which I think is great.
There's been a fair amount of experience with them with the Forest Service in Oregon, I know, and I think some of that has sort of migrated up here to some of the forestry and wildland folks, and so I think there's getting to be more familiarity with it and just sort of awareness of the benefits at that supervisory level.
And James and I, depending on the community need or requests or whatever, we are considering applying for a grant to purchase one for the conservation district, because the one they're using, you'll see it unfolded, but it folds up and you can fit it in the back of a small SUV. So we're thinking between the ag, forestry, and the Firewise folks, we could have one in the office that we loan out to the community. So
What about during burn bans?
Well, can't do it during burn bans, for sure. One thing I do stress when I talk with my engineering connections, is that they're mostly concerned with the air pollution part and the smoke and everything, and that makes sense to me. But to me, the alternative is, again, do you want all this flammable fuel material on your property, where if that goes off outside of a kiln, you have much less control of it? And yeah, in general, I would say this time of year is perfect for it. And I mean, on the way here, we just saw a couple big smoke clouds.
3 on the way here,
Yeah. And I mean, from what I've seen, what I've experienced, I'd much rather have it in a kiln. So.
All right. You guys have anything more? Any more questions before we
Head up and
head over there?
Once this is started like this, can it be used in another batch and actually burned?
yep.
We haven't tried that, but
You lose
Should.
the border.
that's true. This fine border.
It's really tying the yard together.
Everything is a toss-up, you know. You have to weigh the pros and cons.
And if you did not sign in on our sign-in sheet when we walk back by the table, please do that. We have to report how many people come to our workshops and all that jazz.
And we'll also have sign-ups for free wildfire ready neighbors and forestry visits. If you don't want to sign up today, that's fine. I have some business cards there. But everything on the table is free. Feel free to take a koozie on your way out. We have plant guides. We have all sorts of flyers.
Those koozies are nice.
Too bad we don't have anything to put in them.
Plus the black really makes the dandelions pop.
All right, so just real quick, biochar is a substance that you make through the process of pyrolysis. Did people all sort of know this part? So pyrolysis is heating a substance, a material, in the absence of oxygen. And when you pyrolyze a material, it releases liquid, water, things like that, and gas. And as long as there's no oxygen there, it's not going to actually burn. And so what you're left behind is carbon material. And that is the biochar, which is, as Claire said, basically the same thing as lump charcoal. It's just got a different end use, and that really seems to be the only difference in definition between a lump charcoal. Briquettes are obviously all processed and stuff like that, but that and biochar. So there are lots of different ways you can make biochar. The most easiest, simple, basic method is probably just a pile that you light from the top down. And from the way that that burns and the air is flowing, at least parts of the pile have a limited supply of oxygen, and so you do get a small amount of biochar. Stepping up from that would be a pit method, which is probably the oldest way of making biochar. So there, because you're doing it in a pit, the oxygen's not able to get to the bottom. You're burning from the top, what Claire referred to as top cap, flame cap, excuse me, where the flame is kind of capping off the oxygen. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, you've got controlled systems that are a tank within a tank, which are very precise in terms of the temperatures and being able to start and stop the process of pyrolysis. And this here, this biochar kiln that we got through our grant, is a very much in between step between a hole in the ground and one of these fancier kilns. And so what this is a double ring of, yeah. So what this is a double ring of sheet metal that has some angle iron creating this airspace in between. It's very thin gauge, and so the advantage is that it's pretty light, pretty portable. You can pick up, one of these sections, one person, no problem. and then they just bolt together pretty quickly. So you form this inner ring with these angle irons stepping off, and then you can attach the outer heat shield to that. You want to do it on some softer ground or have a pile of dirt because you want to make sure that there's a airtight seal around the bottom, because you don't want air coming in the bottom of the pile, because that defeats the whole purpose of what you're trying to do. And so we took advantage of some of our finest soil, just pure sand with this spot. So pretty easy to get it a little bit buried. And then once it was down and set up, I just go through with a shovel and kind of pull some material up against the edge to make sure that you can't get any air in the bottom. So the way this works is we want to finish filling this, which we'll do in just a minute, and you light the top. The idea is that the first load is smaller material, pretty loosely packed. You want to have a decent amount of air in there. So we made use of some of our nice Scotch broom to make some kind of pockets. And you light off the top and let that initial pile burn down pretty much to the bottom. And then at that point you start going to your piles and adding material. And what we learned is you definitely want to get your bigger stuff in earlier. You want to start with dry material, but once this thing is going, it's okay to use pretty green wood, we found. And that really the main thing is, as you're adding layers in, you want to make sure it's pretty much the same, both from moisture and diameter. So you can do a green layer all together, because it'll all take about the same amount of time if you've all got pieces that are roughly the same size and roughly the same moisture content. And what you're doing is you're waiting for some ash to form on that layer. And as soon as you start to see some white ash forming, that's time to add the next layer. Another thing you can do as you're burning is monitor for smoke. If you've got smoke coming out, you're not fully pyrolyzing, you're not fully burning off all that gas that's being released, and it's probably a sign that you've got added too much material that's too wet, too big, and you kind of want to back off and get back to that smokeless burn. The advantage of this outer heat shield is you've got the fire burning sort of down inside the kiln, and so that's creating heat that's going up, and it's pulling air in, and it comes through this air gap here, and it gets heated as it's coming up the inner wall of the kiln, which is obviously hot from the fire. And so you've got hot air coming over the top, which helps with the convection and lifting of the whole process, but also you've got these superheated gases coming off, and you don't want to be hitting them with cold air to slow the combustion process. So this makes it a little bit more efficient than just having the sole inner ring. And that's kind of everything I know about biochar.
Will you talk a little bit like how you filled it from the bottom?
I filled it from the bottom with small dry pieces that are loosely packed.
But you also started with some bigger logs kind of to...
Oh yeah, we had a couple sort of obnoxiously large pieces that I just threw in there with the thought that they'll be in the bottom, so they'll have a really long time to burn. And they also added just a little bit of a structure to that bottom layer to make sure that some air could get in for that initial burn. After that is when you want it to become more of an anoxic environment.
Have you been able to put any stumps in it?
We have not tried that, and that would be kind of hard, because what we did find during the first time is the neater those layers are, the better your product is going to be. If you're just trying to get rid of stuff, it doesn't really matter, you can chuck it in. But as soon as you have that one stick that's coming up at an angle, your whole layer gets thrown off and everything's burning at different rates and you're losing material. And so, I mean, you can be sort of endlessly picky in how you do this, and cut everything down to, a 1 foot piece, and it'll stack perfectly. And I've seen piles like that, and I'm sure they get a ton of biochar out of it. So it's a question of how much labor do you want to put in versus how much product do you want to yield at the end.
Is this how you loaded it the first time?
No, the first time we tried loading it with the tractor, and it made a huge janky mess with big, and this metal's so solid that if you accidentally nudge it with the tractor, it'll bend, and so so doing it by hand seems to be our best approach so far.
But when you're reloading this, So
Yes.
you have to be super careful.
Yeah, so there's super hot gas air coming out through this spot, so you want to be real careful reaching over the top. Obviously, sharp metal edges that are very hot, and the gas. So reaching into the middle part once it's going is not very pleasant. So like I said, you burn this down, you start adding layers, you wait for them to get ashy, you add another layer, you keep working up until the thing's full. At that point, you need to extinguish it because you don't want the whole thing to burn up because you're trying to get an end product. And so that's what we have the water for over there with a pump and some 1-inch hose so that you can try and put it out as quickly as possible, because the longer it keeps burning, the more it's burning itself off and turning to ash, and the less yield you'll get for biochar.
So what level was the biochar when you did it? Like how high on here?
The first time we got it about half full.
Wow. That was a messy one too.
And that was a messy one, yeah, without enough material. This supposedly holds 6 yards, and the manufacturer recommends having about 8 times that in material if you want to fill it.
And you can see here that we've got something headed toward that probably, but it's unlikely that even this will be a totally full load. And that was one of the biggest surprises, is we've got 10 acres to reforest, like I said, and that seems like a whole lot of downed alder. And then we did it the first time and we just sort of couldn't come up with enough brush. And so this is another area that we plan to use this on, this space between us and the road. And we want to just clear it up, burn the stuff that's too small to mill and too big to chip, I guess. That's kind of what we're looking for in different sizes, just specific to our farm and what we have going on. But the hope is to get the animals in here and then follow with biochar and then replant. And then this is just going to take one load. I mean, it'll just charge so quickly.
So what's cool then is this is so portable that you could just I have an area over here I need to work on. You just take everything there instead of bringing the wood.
Yeah.
How often are you burning it?
This is only the second time we've used it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, we're newbies.
But this is what the Forest Service has been using in Oregon is different versions of this model. And they can take it up a forest road, and you need a tank of water, and you're ready to go.
This particular kiln is called the Ring of Fire, and it's made by Wilson Biochar. I also have a book called The Practical Biochar Handbook, written by the owner of this company,
Kelpie Wilson, who's sort of one of the queens of biochar.
Maybe the biggest biochar nerd that exists.
Yeah.
And she's really into regenerative agriculture as well, and has a background in that. So her perspective was especially interesting and in line with kind of what we have going on here. So I think that's.
How long did you age this material relative to drying it out?
Variously.
It's recommended that you want a moisture content of 20% or less to start. Our ambient humidity here is usually 90%, so you can leave it out for a year and it'll still be wet.
The driest stuff in here is stuff that we got from the woods that's just been down under evergreens for who knows how many years. And then we have these piles kind of separated by moisture level. But I'd say the oldest stuff is a month.
Yeah. But I mean, we were able to do pretty well the first time we did this with similarly green wood. And that was back in
blackberry, which we don't have this time.
That was February, where it was pouring every day too, so the pile was just perpetually wet, and it still worked. So again, I think that the drier it is, the better your yield will be. But
any fuel sources that you should stay away from? Wood, like tree species wise or anything?
Not that I have heard about.
Okay.
There probably is something out there, but not that we have heard of.
I'd be careful with cedar just because it's so noxious, but that's just more of a stay out of the way of the.
This Scotch spoon might be a little noxious too.
All right.
No, or obviously not treated lumber.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Pallets.
All right.
Do we want to finish it off and set her off?
Sounds good.
Cool.
Anybody have any more questions?
Did you find for the quenching? How did you go through the entire container?
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. The first time we did it was in that spot closer to the garden, and so we had water, and so we just did it with a garden hose, which was not quite enough flow to be able to put it out quickly. It took a really long time. So what you do is you decide you're done, that it's full enough or you're out of material, and you try and quench it as much as you can, and you cool down one side and you pop it open, and then you start to rake the coals out, spraying as you go, because it's just too deep otherwise to extinguish the center of the pile. You got to flatten it out, and trying to do that with a garden hose, there just wasn't enough. So I'm optimistic that with a bigger pump and a 1-inch hose, it'll go a lot faster. My guess is I'll be able to do it with one tote, but I got the second one up here just to make the fire people happy. We want to stay in good relations with our fire chief. And I have to go to meetings with him, so it'd be embarrassing if I started a fire.
Cool. Well, next step is a little cardboard on top, which
Can we get just a little bit more wood in here?
Yeah.
I wasn't quite done
okay.
before.
Show us where to go.
The driest, smallest stuff is right here in the middle of this pile. So just trying to grab a little bit more of this.
Just get in there. It's so easy.
It's so easy. No, it's really not.
We could move the boards back.
We could.
Those more.
Yep.
Hope it's enough. Looks like it is.
Where? Oh yeah. Where's the torch?
Over behind on the side.
Oh.
Somewhere. It's stuff happening. I think our team's fine. That's our little baby for garden.
Oh, is it?
But
Ooh, you're gonna make that smell good.
oh yeah, it's an aromatherapy
Hey.
Pete, you're not packing up on that?
What's that?
You're not going to put that on your back?
Probably. Well, I don't know. We'll see.
That looks like something
it's great.
Move the carry a little bit.
So for a party, you have to be far away from each other and the fire. You don't have to talk.
Where's the pizza?
I know, it'd be great.
I think a hot dog's and beer, but
What's that?
One of the setback road.
Once it's not over the top and the heat's more just going straight up, you can get a lot closer, a lot more comfortably.
you know people. You
Yeah,
got them
no.
on speed.
It's wet around here still.
Good use of Scotch broom though.
Oh yeah.
Are so good. I mean, it's just been
So years ago, I was trying to convince Kitsap County to invest in one similar to this, but you can actually, it's a self-contained unit that you can actually pull energy off of it.
Okay.
So you can do biochar and then actually fill up batteries.
Uh-huh.
Throw out your elbow and your shoulder.
Oh yeah, they can go into.
The water from the soaking is out of it pretty quick. That's dry within a couple days, especially if you're raking it periodically to make sure there's no more hot spots. And then, like Claire was talking about, you've got all the options to charge it or treat it with a fertilizer or some sort of additive that you can do before you apply it. So those are sort of the other steps would be crushing and pre-treating.
So you can almost even put it in your chicken coop.
Yep.
And they poop all over it.
Yeah, people do just mix it right into the setting. And then it goes right into the compost if you're composting it.
Well, thank you all for coming. You're welcome to stay and help, but you can wander off too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.